to the Policy and Strategy Committee this afternoon. And before I ask for apologies and list of substitutes, can I say that I'll be chairing this meeting with strict adherence to standing orders, especially Standing Order 46, which clarifies what constitutes a point of order, and also Standing Order 50, which clarifies the authority of the chair. I'd ask for your cooperation. There'll be plenty of opportunity to ask questions or to make comments, and I'd ask you that if you want to make a comment or question, that you put it on the chat bar. When another member's talking, you respect their right to make their contribution, and your right will also be respected thereafter. Can I now ask, Andrew, are there any apologies, or can you also identify any substitutes, please?
Yes, Convener. Apologies received from Councillor Dinesh Ashraf, who's been substituted by Councillor Larson. Councillor Watson, he's in another meeting and can't make it, so he's been substituted by Councillor Burgess. And Councillor Fannin has just indicated she's having connection problems, so she's having trouble staying in the meeting, so she might be in and out.
Okay. Any additional apologies from any members?
Can I put in apologies, please, for Councillor Heather Brennan McVeigh. Councillor Gourley was hoping to substitute, but she also is still connected to another meeting.
Right. Thank you, Louise. Right. With the approval of the committee, it will be my intention to vary the agenda today and to take item 6 before item 3. That will allow Terry Curry, who's the chairperson of the St Ambrose Buchanan Recovery Group, to make his presentation and then to leave the meeting if he so desires. So, is there approval for that approach, please? I take that to be yes. Thank you. Can we now go to the agenda, please? Agenda 1 is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Could you intimate them, please?
John.
Yes.
Tommy here. Item 8 there, John, is the culture, sport and learning services. As always, I declare an interest in anything that's to do with Catherine's part-time employment. So item 8, I'll declare an interest.
Okay, thanks. Any further declarations of interest? No. Takes us on to item 2, the minutes of the Audit and Scrutiny Panel, the 23rd of September. It's pages 5 to 12. Are there any comments, questions in relation to that? No. Okay. The agree to the minutes been approved. It now takes us to agenda item 6 on the agenda. The St Ambrose Buchanan High School Campus Site Recovery Progress Report. Firstly, welcome along to the meeting today, Terry. Thanks very much for being on call. Would you like to present your report to the committee?
Okay, thank you, convener. I will summarize the contents of the report. Note which I will refer to at the end of the report, because it will to the issues which are arisen at the site. It refers to the plan approval in June 2010, talks about the first mention of water problem in October. Lanarkshire GP about the incidence of staff with bladder cancer. June, the independent review of the situation on the 12th of June 19. Page 6 of the report refers to the independent review of the type field of the review were published in 2019. Pages 7 and 8 refer to conclusions and recommendations of the independent review team. The team made for
sorry, Terry, just sorry, convener. Could Terry turn off his video? Terry, could you turn off your video, because it's very bad, the sound. We'll see if that improves it.
Okay.
People still won't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now? Is that better?
That's much better, thank you.
Right. The independent review team made 5 recommendations around the removal of contaminants, further water sampling, the involvement of the drinking water regulator, and making public periodic testing results for the membrane available. The fifth recommendation of the review team concerned the setting up of the site recovery group. Page 9 of my report speaks of the terms of reference of the group. In pages 10 and 11, we see a summary of the various works carried out by North Lanarkshire Council over the past 15 months and the alignment of this work with the recommendation of the independent review team. On pages 12 to 15 of the report, comments and conclusions from Christine Davidson, our scientific advisor. She basically says that the Council has responded appropriately to the issues which have arisen at the campus. Where there was evidence of contamination, it was investigated, the cause identified, and appropriate monitoring or mitigation put in place. Pages 16 and 17 reflect the discussions which the group has had in respect of confidence levels within the schools. The group received presentations from both St Ambrose and Buchanan High School staff, both of which revealed positive findings from attitudinal surveys that were undertaken. Reference is also made to attendance level statistics at both schools, which show no adverse impact as a result of the site issues. In my own conversations with pupils, I was left in no doubt that the site issues had a significant negative effect on pupils in the short term. However, after a fairly short period, the pupils were exceptionally keen for things to get back to normal. In particular, they wanted to focus on their education and issues pertaining to that. The appendices list the group membership, the number of meetings which were held, and also a detailed action plan arising from the independent water systems report. I now come back to my introductory note. I wish to offer sincere thanks to the group for the work they have done and for the constructive debates and the discussions. I wish to thank Council officials for their help and diligence in pursuing the tasks set out for them and for the helpful way they have reacted to additional requests for information or indeed works. And most of all, I wish to inform the Council Committee that we have largely fulfilled the remit, but that there remains much work to be done. That is work relative to ongoing water systems action plan, the membrane, the drainage system, and the settlement issues on the site. The biggest single issue to be addressed is the drainage system. I have referred to the recent pipe rupture which caused serious disruption. The problem is linked to the settlement issues and a permanent solution does not yet appear to be in sight. The site recovery group plans to meet again in February and hopefully there will be progress to report on some of these other issues. I've also asked that Council officials come to that meeting with a plan which would inform us how the site community would continue to be briefed on an ongoing basis, these site issues in the absence of the site recovery group, and to put in place arrangements to brief the Council on how ongoing issues will be monitored, addressed and reported on. Convener, I'm happy to take questions on the report.
Well, thanks very much, Terry. Any comments, questions to Terry?
Convener, Councillor McNally and then Councillor Carson have indicated they wish to speak.
Frank, first.
Thanks very much, Leader. Just a few comments from me on this one. I think just really to say a massive thank you to the Site Recovery Group for their hard work since they commenced this back in September 2019, including staff, the parents, the pupils, Dr Davison, and of course Terry for all his efforts, and also to our officials within the council for the work that they've done as well. I think the situation that developed at St Ambrose, Buchanan and Townhead it was certainly one of the most challenging situations since I've been a councillor, and that staggering frenzy that was created really did undermine confidence in two incredibly high performing schools. So it has taken a tremendous amount of work from the SRG, the head teachers, staff, parents and pupils to rebuild that confidence. And I think on page 16 of Terry's report, page 75 of the papers that we've got before us today, agenda point 7, I think that's a really pertinent part of the report, and particularly the 5th paragraph down, talking about the impact that it had on young people, the impact that it had on staff, and the line that sort of stood out to me amongst Terry's discussion with the pupils, they were also saddened that the reputation of the schools was being trashed on a daily basis, and I think that's something that really needs to be reflected upon across the board about the impact that this whole period had on young people and staff within that school. But I think what Terry has said is absolutely right. There is still work to do. We need to be pursuing that diligently. But it is really positive to see the positivity that has now come from the young people, from staff within the school, and just really to place on record thanks to everyone who has made that a reality over the last year.
Thanks very much, Frank. Councillor Larson, Kirsten.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry about the delay there. I'm having a wee bit of issue with my sound. Thank you, Terry, for speaking to us there and for your report. And just like Frank, I would like to pass on my thanks to the work of the recovery group. I know that you've done a lot of hard work, and that's been an important part of the recovery process. Just picking up on what the convener Frank touched upon there in terms of the reputation of the schools locally. I mean, I know that St Ambrose and Buchanan are recognised as excellent schools within the local area. I don't think there seems to have been, no, certainly from just my own perception, an undermining of the school's reputation in the long term, maybe in the short term, but I think a lot of those concerns led back to problems of communication and questions that parents and children had that they were unsettled about. I just want to ask you 2 questions, Terry, if you don't mind, and it's in relation to what you spoke about in the foreword to your report at items C and D. And one of the questions is about the smell that you were talking about from the ongoing drainage issues, and I know there's no obvious resolution to that yet. I wonder if you could elaborate a wee bit more on the kind of problems that the smell is causing, what level of concern is there about that drainage problem, and also in relation to the settlement issues that continue and are an ongoing problem at the site. How much of a problem do they pose to the school and its inhabitants, and what do you think is likely to happen, or what do you hope will happen moving forward? Thank you.
Terry, you want to respond to the 2 questions, please?
Yes, convener. In terms of the smell, this issue just come up at our last meeting. There was a further pipe rupture in early November. And when I had first written a draft of my report, both head teachers asked me to strengthen my comments in that, because in particular they felt that there was massive inconvenience with a number of the toilets being out of commission at St Ambrose. But also there was this smell which was causing nausea and impacting on a lot of people. So that was the big issue there. The settlement issues is linked to the drainage issue. One of the reasons we're getting these ruptures of the pipe system is because the school is built in a concrete slab, and the pipes but the surrounding area, the playground and the playing fields are not. So when you get movement there, it's putting tremendous pressure on the pipework coming out of the drainage system in the schools, and that's what's causing the rupture. To be honest, in terms of settlement, the settlement issues are going to be there forever. And that's something that's going to have to be monitored by the council all the year round and addressed when particular issues come up. But settlement in itself would not be disruptive. It's when it impacts on other things like the drainage system, and that's where the problem is. And I have to be honest and say, I still do not see a permanent solution for that, although I know that officials are working with the contractor very, very hard to come up with one. But as of yet, there is no permanent solution to that. So we should not be surprised if further ruptures occur in future.
Thanks very much, Terry. Des or Robert, would you like to make any comment in relation to what Terry has just said?
I'll come in, thank you, Chair. No, I mean, again, Terry is absolutely correct. We know it's very clear of the issues of settlement on that site. There are a number of technical solutions currently getting looked at with appointed contractors, specialist contractors, elastic joints, etc. But Terry is also right to highlight that there could well be a further feature point. What I think is really important from our respect is how quickly we respond to that. We don't want to see any reoccurrence of the delays and some of the issues around communication that caused that loss of confidence around the St Ambrose site way back from its first point of handover around Blue Water. So we absolutely have a dedicated team that now works to support that education establishment, the two school head teachers, and we are working through those technical solutions. We do hope to find one that will remedy it long term, but we remain ever prepared to respond actually as an emergency daily should there be any such breach in the future. Obviously we hope that isn't the case, but we are prepared for it.
Thanks very much, Des. Robert, recognising your professional background, have you any comments to make in relation to the points highlighted?
Really, just to support what Des has said, convener, and it's about, and the report actually says that we're monitoring it seasonally as well as monitoring continually. Terry's quite right, the issue of subsidence can lead to future issues arising, so we're looking for a permanent solution, and until we find that, we will be vigilant and make sure that we're keeping on top of this situation. We're working very, very closely with the contractor to make sure that they fulfil their obligations in respect of the issues which are being discussed.
Thanks very much. Kirsten, are you reassured? Do you want a supplementary?
That's fine, thank you.
Right. Okay, next question is from Tom Johnston. Tom?
Thanks, convener. It was just to emphasise that one of the key figures to me are on page 75 or page 16 of the report, where it says that the school roll of St Ambrose between 2016 and 20 had gone up from 1243 to 1327. So throughout this crisis, there was in fact not only a full confidence in St Ambrose itself, but in fact it was also attracting transfer applications to the school throughout these turbulent years. And I think these figures speak volumes. Thanks very much.
So that's more of a comment than a question, Tom. Okay. Can Jim Hume next on the chat bar? Jim?
Thanks, Chair. My questions are for Des rather than Terry, and there are three of them, Chair. The first one is in relation to updates for the four outstanding issues that Terry had raised: the drainage, the water and the membrane, and community updates. Is there mechanisms in place to afford the community all that information that Terry suggests they need? Also, how will councillors be kept apprised of the council's response to these items? That's question one. Question two is on page 66, item D, where it was specifically mentioned that the council's response to this, where it said the particularly in relation to drinking water supply, these were not addressed seriously or quickly enough by North Lanarkshire Council. Are there any lessons learned from that? Under similar circumstances, there'd be a different response to it. And final question is, all the costs have been associated with these issues. Have they all been borne by the contractors, or is, apart from officers' time and things like that, have there been any costs accrued by the council in response to these things?
Des, can you respond to the three questions from Councillor Hume, please?
Of course, Convener. I'll probably come back to Stephen at the end, if you mind, on the communication side of things, Councillor Hume, because there is ongoing plans in that regard. And indeed, Terry mentioned the follow-up SRG that will be taking place in February, and then a report following that in terms of updated on the actions. In terms of the response to the failure, yeah, I mean, that was a finding we accepted from the independent review that was undertaken by the Scottish Government. Paul Coquette and others were involved in that. And you look back at that kind of timeline where, quite rightly, the school local head teachers and property leads were raising concerns about blue water appearance arising from the copper pipework, but it wasn't escalated up the chain of management quickly enough, and it certainly wasn't dealt with seriously enough. I mean,
Des, excuse me, Chair, I'm sorry, I'm getting interference on the line. Is everybody muted?
Can I ask everybody to mute, please? Des, there seems to be interference from your end as well, following on from yesterday's meeting. Can you turn off your camera and see if it improves?
Of course, I've changed locations, so hopefully that will fix, but I'll turn off the camera just now, if that helps.
Okay, thanks, Des.
Thank you.
Right.
So what I'm trying to say there, Councillor Hume, is we absolutely accept that finding. There was not appropriate, effective response with the urgency required back at that point in 2014, 2015. And when I became Chief Executive of the Council, within, I think, 20 days of that role being taken on, this reached my desk. A matter like this should never reach the desk of the Chief Executive and indeed the senior management team to have to step in to understand why officials down that chain of control didn't take those elements seriously at the appropriate time. So we've been working with the Site Recovery Group ever since. We'll be looking at the control policies and procedures within what was then the property management team, the corporate property management team. As you'll know, there's been a number of changes to kind of key personnel and structures within. So I am confident we would never see a reoccurrence of what unfolded at St Ambrose. I certainly don't want to see any such reoccurrence. And we've taken appropriate actions to mitigate the risks of that within our management controls. In relation to cost, yes, I mean, costs have been incurred. There was the immediate replacement, as you may recall, of the copper pipework with plastic pipework through the whole runs in the building to remove the inherent risk around blue water. We are and still are involved in ongoing discussions. Again, this touches to the settlement issue and issues around expansion joints, obviously, and breaking, causing issues around drainage concerns. So again, Robert might want to come in on this one, but we are very clear that those costs do not reside with the council. These are all linked to the inherent design and construction in the building, and we'll continue to pursue those costs and full cost recovery on behalf of the council. Councillor Hume. But if I pass back to Stephen on the communications part, and hopefully that covers the three questions for you. Maybe Robert wants to.
Before Stephen comes in, can we ask Robert to come in? I think it would follow on if Robert, is there anything you want to add to what Des has said in response to two specific questions? Robert, right, I'm afraid that answers that question. Robert seems to, okay, so we'll leave Robert, perhaps you can rejoin us. In the interim, Stephen, are you in a position to answer the third question, please?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. So a number of things have taken place alongside the establishment of the Site Recovery Group in respect of the publishing of all reports. Those are, monitoring reports, water monitoring reports, the membrane and so on, all the minutes of the Site Recovery Group, all papers that the Site Recovery Group have considered, and those are all published on the council website. The chair of the Site Recovery Group mentioned this in terms of the next meeting of the group. The group is seeking from the council, from officials, a report on how ongoing communication with the school community beyond the Site Recovery Group, now that the Site Recovery Group has completed this report, would it would take place, and that will happen. That will be presented to the group. In terms of communication with elected members of the council about the ongoing processes and works on the site, the site recovery group, I think, are keen to see a formalised mechanism by which the council or a committee of the council considers those, and officers will consider that in terms of the most appropriate committee and take that through the committee process as we would for other things. In terms of informal communication, I will of course keep members up to date with a specific focus obviously on local members, but as I say, the combination of publishing everything on the website in a very open way, the formal reporting to committee and that informal communication should hopefully give members some reassurance.
Terry, is there any comment you want to make in relation to the questions which were posed by Councillor Hume? Terry, you're on silent.
Yes, no, I haven't really got anything to add, Convener. I agree with the answers that were given.
Right, thanks. Has Robert rejoined us? No.
Convener, sorry, Robert's just put in the chat bar he's had problems with his audio. I think he's just left the meeting and is going to try and rejoin to see if that sorts it out.
Thanks, Andrew. Jim, are you reassured with the comments which were made by the officers and by Terry?
Yes, I am reassured, Jim. I appreciate everyone's response to it. Just as a final comment, though, in light of Desi's comments about additional costs, do the council intend, and if so, could members see a comprehensive review of this situation? And I'm thinking of this in light of the new school building programme that's on the go. We certainly don't want these problems to happen in another site. So I would like to know what happened in this site, what caused the problems, and have a comprehensive report on that to members, and perhaps to reassure us that the future build programme won't be hit by similar programmes. Is that an intention of the council?
Des, we want to respond to the point made by Councillor Hume, please.
That means a very valid point. To give Councillor Hume and all members reassurance, after every major capital project, there is a full peer review of the project, what went right, what went wrong, from all stakeholders, right back from the architects, geotechnical engineers, right through to the actual users of facilities. And that continually improves and evolves our project management procedures. Members may recall about 18 months ago, there was a major overhaul and a whole range of new project management arrangements put into place within the council. And they've been reported very positively through the Audit and Scrutiny Committee in terms of the impact they're now having upon improved project outcomes. Councillor Hume, so to give you that assurance, there is that ongoing learning experience. Specifically in relation to the events at St Ambrose, yes, I mean, very much they have been taken on board by the project specialists, the architects involved, our client administration staff, to ensure they cannot simply happen again. And that is back to those now revised internal management procedures and controls that we spoke about, change management controls, and indeed the scale of escalation and the pace of that escalation is absolutely required when you're dealing with projects as complex as this, but also as expensive as to the public purse. And we never want another St Ambrose to happen again.
Reassured, Jim?
Thanks. Yeah, that's fine, Chair.
Thanks very much. I don't see any other names on the chat bar. No one else want to make a contribution or ask a question? If not, Terry, can I firstly thank you for agreeing to chair the site recovery group and for your commitment to ensure that this progress report is tabled for consideration by the committee as recommended in the Scottish Government Independent Review. So thank you very much. You're free to continue on the call, or if you want to leave, Terry, please do so. Thank you very much, Terry.
Thank you, Convener. If you don't mind, I'll leave. I've got another appointment. But thanks to you and all your colleagues.
Okay, right, Terry, thanks very much. Okay, can we agree to the recommendations then contained on page 57 of the report? Agreed? It then takes us on to item 3, introduction of parking charges and update, pages 13 to 16, and ask Nicole Patterson to speak to the report. Nicole.
Thank you very much, Convener. This report is to advise the committee that a petition containing some 6,000 signatures was received from the community in Kilsyth, requesting that the Council reverse the decision to introduce car parking charges in Kilsyth, which was supported following presentation at the Community Board in August 2020. The petition was organised in response to the decision of this committee on the 31st of January this year to introduce off-street car parking charges in council-owned car parks across North Lanarkshire with effect from the 1st of April 2021. However, it's recognised that that was proposed prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, and although plans for implementation have been progressed, a delay in implementing car parking charges would help support the recovery of our town centres from the very significant and ongoing economic impacts which will continue for the immediate future. Within this report, these items are covered in recommendations 1 and 2, with a further recommendation 3 that prior to any further future consultation being undertaken on the implementation of car parking charges, that a report will be submitted to the relevant committee agreeing a future implementation date and project timeline. And finally, recommendation 4, that the financial implications of the proposals set out in 4.1 be noted by the committee. Of course, I'm happy to take any questions, Convener.
Thanks very much, Nicole. First name on the chat bar is Megan Gallagher. Megan?
Thanks very much, Convener. The Conservative Group have an amendment to this paper.
Yep.
I'll share that on screen now for members to see.
Thank you.
Hope you can all see that.
Do you want to speak to the amendment, Megan?
Yes, please, Convener, just briefly, because I think the amendment speaks for itself. Basically, the Conservative Group, as you very well know, has been against car parking charging since the implementation of the idea to implement parking charging back in January. And we were disappointed that unfortunately we couldn't join with another group at that point in time in order to stop parking charging being implemented throughout our town centres. As you can see from the amendment, it says that the Council agrees to reverse this decision to implement car parking charging across North Lanarkshire due to the impact of COVID-19 and the economic damage this has caused to businesses in the wider local authority area. We feel that this just isn't the time to even be considering this. And as you can see from the amendment as well, that the Conservative Group believe that this shouldn't even be looked to even in the end of this current administration. So it's an amendment today, Convener. I'll leave it there because I think it speaks for itself. Thank you.
In the interest of completeness, is there a seconder for this amendment?
I'm seconding Leader Councillor Wilson.
Do you want to speak at this stage?
I'm quite happy with what Councillor Gallagher said, Leader, so I'll just leave it just now.
Thanks very much, Nathan. The next name in the chat bar is Jordan. Jordan?
Thanks, Convener. Again, we have an amendment which I'm happy for Andrew to share. It was provided to Andrew in advance. And then I do intend on speaking. Convener, I'm sure you comes as no surprise.
Okay, Jordan.
Would you like me to wait for members to read the amendment first, Convener?
Unless you want to go through it yourself, right?
I'm happy to start then, Convener. So thanks very much for the opportunity to move the amendment today, Convener. And I do so on behalf of the SNP group on this paper on the introduction of parking charging in North Lanarkshire. Convener, in considering the amendment today and indeed the wider issue of parking charging, it's important to place on record and reflect on how we got to the point we're at today here at committee. For as you know, Convener, the idea to introduce parking charges here in North Lanarkshire is one which was born from your administration. As the report rightly outlines, on the 31st of January 2020 at Policy and Strategy Committee, the proposals to introduce charges were agreed, or as the case actually was, charges were forced through by the Labour group. Because despite political groups across the council being against the proposals, resulting in a requirement to have your casting vote decide on whether to introduce charges or not, you chose to inflict parking charges on local people using your casting and deciding vote. So I wish to say that again, despite the strength of feeling and parties across the chamber urging caution, you as convener used your casting vote to introduce parking charges in North Lanarkshire. Therefore, to many of those participating in today's meeting and indeed the wider audience who will watch this exchange, they may find it somewhat ironic but nonetheless welcome that it is yourself, convener, that's brought forward a paper today to not cancel but delay parking charges, a U-turn of some description, but not the U-turn which your administration should be performing, because Labour should be going further today and cancelling their parking charges plan entirely. I shall come back to that point in a few moments, convener. However, I wish to address head-on an issue that I saw raised in local press in relation to this matter, which is that as leader in announcing the U-turn, it was stated that the only reason we are having to introduce parking charges in North Lanarkshire is due to SNP Scottish Government cuts. But the leader did not, I noticed, share the full picture, and I was glad that the local press did. Because as many will know, the SNP delivered a balanced budget in February this year, a budget which we chose in the circumstances not to introduce parking charges upon the people of North Lanarkshire, instead choosing other options with least impact on public services. So the question then is this: if we could do it, then why didn't his group? And we know the answer, of course, because it's convenient to make unpopular choices and to force the blame onto an SNP Scottish Government and allow them to pick up the blame. But not on our watch, and the people of North Lanarkshire were having none of it. Convener, at the time I have left, I wish to turn to the amendment in my name today. And in so doing, I want to pay tribute to the people of Kilsyth who signed the petition which appears before committee. The Kilsyth petition, like so many of our communities, is an example of the strength of feeling on this issue. Indeed, communities right across North Lanarkshire have made their voice heard. I know that my own have done so through a recent meeting of the Bellshill Community Council where I was left.
Jordan, we've lost you.
Because of the approach undertaken. An example would be the Gladstone car park in Bellshill, directly outside the Salvation Army place of worship, and no consideration was given to exemption on days of worship for them. A blanket approach with insufficient consultation. And it is on consultation that I wish to turn now, because our amendment today rightly acknowledges that the consultation on TROs ended this week, and I want to ensure that the time taken by our communities is valued, and therefore I'm asking in this amendment that their views are not disregarded or discarded, but rather published via a report to elected members. The views of our community are incredibly important in all that we do, and we must hear them. So in turning to the end of my remarks and the amendment today, Convener, I've outlined already we must go further. It is simply not enough to delay. And whilst our amendment today provides a delay until the end of the financial year, because the current delay being proposed is too vague and doesn't take into account the many uncertainties of the pandemic, our amendment does go further. It goes further by rightly stating that the decision to implement car parking charges in North Lanarkshire this year was the wrong one, and therefore agrees that the introduction and implementation of car parking charges should be revisited through the forthcoming and subsequent budget setting process within the local authority. This will give all members of this council, political groups and independent members a chance to cast their verdict on parking charges, and will also allow us time to speak further with local people, the people we represent here in this council. My group, the SNP, shall continue to oppose parking charges, because the people of North Lanarkshire do not need them at this time, as we seek to recover from a global pandemic and restore our town centres to thriving hubs of local economic activity. In closing, I reiterate that the views of the people of North Lanarkshire must be heard and will continue to be heard at the heart of our decisions, and I move the amendment. Thank you, Convener.
In terms of completeness, Councillor Johnson, Tom, do you want to second this? Tom? Tom, you're on mute.
Hello, can you hear me?
We hear you now.
I'm very happy to second this motion. I would point out that our motion says that the implementation should be delayed until at least the end of financial year 2020 to 21. That leaves open any emergency situation coming up in the next financial year, because of course we had to calculate very, very carefully, and we made sure that our balanced budget was against car parking charges. There were no car parking charges in the SNP budget as put forward at the last council budget meeting, a budget that was rejected by the Tory and Labour parties. But the important thing that we also emphasise is that the origins of this current pressure is coming from Kilsyth, which, like many areas in North Lanarkshire, is a small town, fairly isolated from other towns and really dependent on local footfall. Anybody who knows Kilsyth will know that there was a very strong feeling there, a very strong demonstration against car parking charges in the streets of Kilsyth last year. And of course, this would be repeated in other towns like Airdrie, etc. So again, we're against the car parking charges, but we do take into account that we do not know what crises lie ahead, and we are committed to this until the next budget. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tom. Next on the chat bar, Jim Hume, please. Jim?
Thanks, Chair. Just from last year's budget negotiations, there was a £200,000 set-up charge. Has any of that money had to be spent up to this current date?
Nicole, are you in a position to answer?
And convener, so to this point in time there have been minimal costs incurred. Those costs relate principally to the appointment of one officer very recently to a post to manage the car parking function, an appointment to a temporary post. So there has been minimal outlay. We haven't actually procured any of the equipment at this point in time either, so it's minimal. And I can confirm the exact figure if that's helpful, but I don't have it to hand at this point in time.
Okay, thanks very much, Nicole. Jim, are you reassured with that?
That's fine, Jim. I don't need the figures based on that response.
Right, thank you very much, Jim, for your cooperation. Next contribution from Willie Goldie. Willie?
Thanks, convener. It's just to point out as well, it's not just communities like Kilsyth that are affected. Within my own ward, Greenfields, Woodlands Parent Council have extreme concerns about introduction of parking charges into the park and ride. We've had a battle over the years trying to work out with roads and with police and whatever to stop parents and etc. parking outside the schools and causing all sorts of issues. We did resolve that a bit by persuading them to park in the park and ride and walk over to the school with their children, and they're incensed that any introduction of parking charges will kind of reduce any good work that they've done over the years of that. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks very much, Willie. I don't see any other names on the chat bar. Bob Burrows has just come through. Bob?
Thanks, Leader. Just to make a comment and a general comment, it's wider than the introduction about the car parking. Based on the mover of the second amendment about putting together a balanced budget. The Conservative, the SNP and the Labour all put forward a balanced budget. We agree that we can differ on what we have in there to balance the budget. Of that, there's no doubt. But I think it's right to put it on record that the reason we're in this position about putting forward anything to gain a balanced budget is the fact about the impact of the cuts that come to local government, not just North Lanarkshire, local government.
Absolutely.
In fact, when I say that if we're looking at £250 million being taken out of the system over the last 10 years, and we now understand fully that over the next 3 years, we're in excess of £70 million coming out the budget. So to balance the books, yes, it's going to be very difficult as we go forward. And just to say that it might well be in the strength that in fact the administration at Edinburgh, whoever that may be at the present moment, it's the SNP, gives sufficient funding to local government as we go over. It's not that particularly long ago that the SNP opposition in North Lanarkshire were putting through budgets to balance the budgets where you were taking £4 or £5 million out of adult care. Not that long ago you were doing that. And you can maybe look at it and yawn and whatever. That's a fact. That's what was really, really happening. So let's not play the good part about this or that. We've got to try and balance a budget based on massive cuts. In the next 3 years, £74 million cuts coming to this council. That's all I want to say, Councillor. Cheers.
Thanks very much, Bob. Jordan, I see you want back in again. Now, you don't want back in. I was very relaxed in the allocation of time to yourself the last time.
Well,
so if you want back in, be conscious of it.
Can I just check, first of all, convener, you were lax, but you were within the 5 minutes because I recorded myself. I was 4 minutes and 30 seconds,
well, I've got to hear
which is what standing orders say. Nonetheless, though, convener, I was actually moving that we have a recess in order to consider the amendments. I think Andrew has already engaged, facilitated the breakout rooms digitally, and I'd be moving that. I'd be looking for a seconder from my group to facilitate that. I think Councillor Barclay might wish to second that.
Let's not make any assumptions. Councillor Barclay, please.
She's got her hand up, convener, so yes, that would be why I was
okay.
Assuming.
Before we do that, could I move the motion? And the motion is in the recommendations 1 to 4 on page 13. I think two important recommendations, recommendation 2 and recommendation 3. And recommendation 2 clearly says that car parking charges should be delayed due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic until the direct impact of the pandemic has stabilised and our town centres are demonstrating sustainable recovery. I think that is a very clear approach. We do not know how long the pandemic is going to be with us. We don't know whether it's 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years. And I think all that's been said in the recommendation here is wait and reflect on the stabilisation of the town centres has returned. And at that stage, we also do not know what financial position this council or any council will be in Scotland. And it might very well be, following on from what Bob has just said, it might even be more perilous than what it is at the present time. And therefore, parking charges would have to come into the mix and be looked at again. And all we're saying is create that flexibility. And in some respects, I saw the same sentiment being encapsulated and articulated in the SNP motion. Let's delay and let's look at it and reflect again. And we're saying exactly that. Also, I think it's imperative that those who are moving amendments clearly state that if they were successful, there'd be a cost pressure on the budget of £547,000. Where is that £547,000 coming from? Is it coming from the education budget? Is it coming from the social work budget? Is it coming from the roads budget? You just itemise where that £547,000 would be found. Over and above what Bob has said about the next 3 years, £74 million being cut from the budget. So please give us that clarity as well. In the interest of completeness, it would be appreciated. I see that, what do you call it, Paul Damasio has gone to the chat bar. Paul, do you want to make a contribution?
I was just going to request that Andrew Rose email both amendments, please, prior to the recess.
Email to all elected members or email to members of this P&S committee? Are you in a position to do either, Andrew?
Convener, I've already emailed all members on this committee, both sets of amendments, so hopefully all members have that now.
So I'm now seeing Jordan has confirmed that it's been done, and Gillian Fannin has, Kirsten Larson has confirmed it's been done as well. So give us advice. Have you set up rooms for the adjournment?
Convener, rooms are set up for each political group and independents, and I can move members over there whenever you wish. All I'll need is indication of is how long you want those breakout sessions to last, and then I will bring you back in at the end of that time.
Before we do that, is there a seconder for the motion?
I'll second the motion. Leader,
Paul, you want to speak to it?
Yeah, you've covered some of the key points, and I mean, when you hear the SNP talk about doing what's best for communities and doing what's best for the people we represent, you don't follow through. I mean, you allow your government to pass on year after year substantial cuts to the council. You allow them to underfund the attempts we're making to deal with the pandemic. You don't raise your voices at COFLA. You don't raise your voices at any level for your MPs or MSPs. So you're not standing with communities. We're actually about good governance. We've listened to the public. We've listened to their concerns. We've acted appropriately. Nobody can rule anything in or out because we don't know the settlement that your government's going to give us. We're fighting a pandemic. Every single penny counts. We're going to have to now fine £600,000. It's a lot of money we're going to have to fine during the pandemic when we're trying to support residents, to keep them safe, to work with the businesses and other communities to get through it. So these are decisions we don't want to have to take them. We're very clear what our narrative is and what we're about as an administration. That's fighting for residents, protecting residents, standing up to governments, both UK and Scottish, who have got no regard for local government. We do that every single day, and we have to sometimes take tough decisions because of the position your governments have put us in, and the Scottish Government in particular. So we shouldn't take any lectures from you about standing with your communities. You do not stand with your communities. This Labour administration stands with the communities and fights the communities.
Thanks very much, Paul. Can I suggest that we now go for the adjournment? Should I say it's 10 to 3, that we return at 3 o'clock? There should be open dialogue between the business managers. I'm conscious that Sandy Watson is not on the call just now, and that if there's any direct approach to the Conservative group, it should be done through the leader, Megan Gallagher. So with that, can we reappear at 3 o'clock on the call? Andrew?
Councillor Morgan has just indicated he wishes to speak before we move to breakout sessions, convener.
Sorry, Tommy, you just come in there. Tommy.
Yeah. Can I seek a point of clarification, John, about this breakout? When we go into breakout, when we come back, based on the information that you gave there regarding knock-on costs or correlated costs and cuts that would have to be done elsewhere, if there is no indication from other political parties related to their motion where they are to come from, surely, in view of the fact that this is now a standing order of council, that those motions would have to be classified as incompetent.
Tommy, allow me to take advice from the monitoring officer. Archie?
Convener.
Councillor Morgan, of course, is correct in terms of the affordability requirements in the standing orders, but my reading of the report itself is that it makes allowance for a determination in the future, namely in terms of budget setting. And my understanding of both amendments is that they also reflect such a process.
Tommy, that's the advice from the monitoring officer. We have to accept the advice. Can we go for the adjournment and see if we can exploit any potential for a composite motion or amendment? Okay.
Councillor Linden has just indicated a point of order, convener.
Now, Jordan, remember what I said at the point of order earlier on?
Convener, I don't require a reminder, Convener. I entirely understand the standing orders. I was just simply saying that the monitoring officer has already verified that the motion is competent, and I was just providing that reassurance to you and to the councillor involved.
Well, I don't think you need to give reassurance. Archie was explicitly clear, and all members assimilated that information.
It was before Archie had spoken,
Can we now go, please, for the adjournment? Could you facilitate the virtual room scenario, please, Andrew?
Yep, I'll transfer members now.
You're on mute, Andrew.
Sorry, I had a big speech then. Just to remind everyone left in the meeting that we are still live streamed, so you may wish to mute and stop your video until the meeting resumes.
I'm working on the basis that everyone has returned from the virtual rooms. I hope you found the virtual rooms to your satisfaction. Can we now progress the meeting? And I move the motion as outlined previous to the adjournment, and Paul Kelly seconded the motion. Andrew, you want to take us through the motion and amendments, unless there's any comment?
Sorry, Convener, just for clarity, I've sent Andrew a composite amendment, which Andrew will take us through.
Just bear with me a moment. I'm just placing that into a template so I can display it on the screen for you, Convener. Hopefully everyone can see that composite amendment now, Convener.
So it's been moved by Councillor Linden and seconded by Councillor Gallagher. Jordan, do you want to take us through this? I mean, we'll read it at the same time as getting any clarification from yourself.
Thanks, Convener. Just very briefly, I think that the reason why we've had to move amendments at committee today are well rehearsed and articulated in that we have. Sorry, I think Councillor Valentine may be unmuted.
I'm about to vote.
Andrew, could you possibly mute Councillor Valentine?
Yeah, it's a bit difficult when I'm sharing a screen. My colleague Leslie Dysart will.
Lovely.
For you.
Sorry, Convener, apologies for that. Yes, so Convener, as I was saying, we're pretty clear as to why we're having to move the amendment today, given the decision, the fourth decision in terms of the vote at January's Policy and Strategy Committee. The key elements, obviously, of the amendment in my name still stand, but I think that the important point that Councillor Gallagher and her group, as well as my group, have came to agree on is the fact that we don't agree with the introduction of parking charges in North Lanarkshire, and on that fundamental principle, we are seeking to ensure that that is articulated in the amendment under Section 5. The addition is obviously Section 4, because any cancellation of parking charges will not require Nicole Parsons' fantastic team to undertake the exercise on on-street parking permits. So that is the key elements, but ultimately what we wanted to ensure, Convener, through the amendment was that the underpinning principles were a fundamental disagreement with the introduction of parking charges, and secondly, that of the fundamental disagreement of the local communities across North Lanarkshire to the introduction of parking charges. Thanks, Convener. I don't have anything further to add.
Megan, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Convener. Just briefly again, I mean, the collegiate approach here from the Conservative and the SNP group is that we both fundamentally disagree with parking charges, and I'm pleased that we were able to come together in the best interest of communities across North Lanarkshire. So I hope that all councillors will consider the amendment today and we can vote in unity. Thank you.
Can you just clarify point 3? Did I read that the implementation should be delayed? Does that contradict what comes after and what you verbally upgraded the members on?
But perhaps I can clarify, Convener, on that. I think what we're trying to articulate was that the decision has been taken in January by Policy and Strategy to go ahead with the implementation, and that in your report today you were seeking a delay, so with an undefined period. So what we wanted to be specific on is that we are delaying, but that in terms of this financial year, so the savings won't be realised, and that as we move forward, we don't want to see any further mention of car parking charges, and obviously the associated economic impact in terms of our position in the budget will be articulated by groups and the budget setting process. I think, Convener, rather than having a to and fro, I don't know if you have a further question on the amendment.
So the substantive point is that it's not tantamount to delaying, but tantamount to rejecting completely.
I think that's pretty clear, Convener, from amendment.
So that's it. So for the avoidance of any doubt, so para 3 looks as if it's talking about delay, when really in essence what we're talking about is a cancellation, a rejection. Is that the point?
I think that's pretty clear, Convener. We don't want it revisited.
Right, okay. Right. Andrew, you have one motion, you have one amendment. You want to go to the vote, please?
Yes, convener, we have the motion by yourself and the composite amendment by Councillor Linden. I'll take members through in the normal way. Councillor Barclay.
Amendment.
Councillor Beveridge isn't here. Councillor Branning isn't Polly. Councillor Burgess.
Amendment.
Councillor Burrows.
Motion.
Councillor Damasio.
Amendment.
Councillor Duffy.
Motion.
Councillor Fannin. Let's check if Councillor Fannon's on the call.
Gillian.
Amendment. Yep, thank you. Councillor Gallagher.
Amendment.
Councillor Goldie.
Amendment.
Councillor Graham.
Motion.
Councillor Hume.
Amendment.
Councillor Tom Johnson.
Amendment.
Councillor Larson.
Amendment.
Councillor Kelly.
Motion.
Councillor Lennon.
Amendment.
Councillor Linden.
Amendment.
Councillor Logue.
Motion.
Councillor McGowan.
Amendment.
Councillor McNally.
Motion.
Councillor McPake.
Motion.
Councillor Morgan.
Motion.
Councillor Rorty.
Motion.
Councillor Alan Valentine.
Amendment.
Amendment. And Councillor Wilson. Thank you very much. The amendment received 14 votes, the motion 9, so the amendment is carried.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we now move on to item 4 on the agenda? It's delivering for communities. You'll find the report on pages 17 to 34. I'd ask Des Murray to highlight salient points in the report. Des?
Thank you, convener. Members, this report basically summarises the progress that's been achieved in North Lanarkshire Council over the last 2 years. Section 1 of the report reflects upon the progress achieved under the combined plan for North Lanarkshire, jointly approved across political parties, and indeed the programme of work which was implemented first in 2019 through until 2020. Members may recall some of the previous linked reports to this from Audit Scotland and others, commenting on the significant progress the Council had achieved around economic regeneration, significant investment and indeed job creation. And indeed before COVID arrived in late March, North Lanarkshire for the first time was starting to report employment levels above the Scottish average, and indeed in key areas such as youth unemployment now being tackled and challenged in areas of high deprivation. And these are really important markers in terms of the progress of the Council, the progress of the plan and the progress of the programme itself. Nevertheless, there's a need to continually review and update and evaluate the impact of COVID and indeed what lies ahead for the Council in relation to significant financial pressures tied to the Section 95 officers' previous financial forecast updated at a previous committee. We have in front of you a report which seeks to examine the progress made around the community boards and ensure that the Council senior management team structures remain aligned to that. If anything, using that structural review to strengthen those relationships with the community and bring forward those community interests into the heart of the organisation, so we have a true joined partnership there, which co-production lies at the heart of that. Also within the report, we reflect upon the fact that during the investigation of parity of pay between current stakeholders and employees in the senior management team and peer employees, you'll see under Section 2 into Section 3 that there's a current pay disparity that's been identified. Again, this report seeks to identify that and address that matter, but it seeks to do it against the background of COVID. It seeks to do it against the background of a realisation and a need, expectation that the Council must continue to identify savings that will support and protect frontline jobs across North Lanarkshire. So the report also has within it a savings agenda. Some £208,000 would be saved if this report was to be approved on a recurring basis. That's achieved through the deletion of 3 senior posts within the corporate management team. The duties and responsibilities of those 3 senior posts being redistributed around a smaller number of senior management heads of service. I mentioned the pay parity item. If you take you to section 2.55, you'll see that just now, in terms of the detail and included within Appendix 3, North Lanarkshire Council heads of service are primarily employed under a head of service 4 grading. That is significantly below their peer authorities as identified in 2.57. So therefore, as part of this exercise to reduce the overall number of senior heads and align the pay and grading, that we seek to move our heads of service primarily to an HOS 2 level, which is in comparison and alignment to peers. But we do that, I say, against a backdrop of saving, a backdrop of reduced resources, and indeed enhancing the roles and responsibilities of the senior officers so that they can play a bigger part in supporting those communities. So I'm not going into any further detail on that. There obviously has been extensive engagement and discussion with elected members. Happy to take any questions to the report, convener, and the recommendations obviously are detailed within the document itself.
Okay, can I say that the recommendations are contained on page 18? There are 9 recommendations there, so if we can focus on those, it might be helpful. The first name on the chat bar is Jordan, please.
Thanks very much, convener. And can I just take the opportunity to ask to make a comment before the question? With your indulgence, convener, can I just begin by thanking the chief executive for the approach he's undertaken in terms of engaging with my group. I know he's done it with other groups on this report to ensure that we understand fully its implications. It's very much appreciated. Convener, in terms of question, delivering for communities is the headline of the report today, and one of the things that we would be keen to seek reassurance from the Chief Executive on is the capacity for this change to do just that, to place communities and local people, particularly through our community boards, but more generally, more wider, at the heart of our corporate council, and just perhaps an expansion on the record of, the ambition that this plan has to do just that. And then secondly, convener, is just a reassurance that in doing this, the principles that we are hoping to fulfil are not only placing communities at the heart, but ensuring that the council delivers for everybody, and we obviously see the savings associated with that. So perhaps the Chief Exec could articulate, convener, the kind of community benefit as a result of this plan.
Des, you want to respond to the 2 specific questions, please?
Thank you, convener. Yes, I mean, I would describe it as a crossroads. Where we're at just now as an organisation, as a council. Over the last 2 years, our communities team, which is a standalone function, has made significant progress in progressing the community's agenda. The establishment of the community boards, all again supported by elected members, and indeed, we absolutely recognise at a very early stage, there's still a lot of work to do in ensuring those boards are representative of the communities, that the seldom heard voices, etc., are all contained within the work of those boards for the future. But right now we have a situation where we have a single directorate being the link point for those many towns and areas across North Lanarkshire. And we don't have a direct relationship between those functions and indeed the corporate management team that Councillor Linden referenced. In this report is the intention for each of the operational heads of service to be given explicit and contractually obliged obligations to take on the role of champion for a defined community board area. So in essence, all 9 community boards will be directly represented for the first time on the corporate management team structure of the organisation. So fundamentally, this brings forward and accelerates that community agenda. It's something we have to do. It's back to that comment I made at the start around crossroads, because lying ahead of us will be significant challenges in the post-COVID, concurrent COVID environment, and the role and relationship that exists between local public services and indeed the local communities that we serve. And there's been significant examples of how huge the response has been around big community and local government working well together during the current COVID pandemic. And we want to hold on to that, retain it, and build upon it. In relation to the future delivery of it, we're very clear, Councillor Linden, that these are explicit savings targets that absolutely will be realised. I mean, I can equate them back to you in terms of the number of teachers' jobs that equates to, the number of refuse workers that equates to. So basically, we'll be creating a leaner management team. We take significant steps towards protecting potential pressures upon frontline services. And I believe that's the responsibility of the senior management team to take those decisions to reduce that overall chief officer pool, so to speak. But I also believe that we have the talent. I believe that we have the people employed in the organisation that can drive forward this agenda and indeed meet the challenges that lie ahead. which is not insurmountable, but certainly will cause concern and risk if we don't have the right people in there doing the right job at the right pay. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Des. Next name in the chat bar is Megan. Megan, you want to ask a question or comment?
Thanks, Convener. Convener, the Conservative group have an amendment to the paper.
Andrew, you in a position to display that?
Yeah, I'll put that up now, Convener.
Megan, you want to take us through the amendment, please?
Thank you very much, Convener. Convener, the Conservative group agree with the restructuring in principle. However, we are really concerned in terms of the pay increases for heads of service. And that is the reason for our amendment today. We're worried about the implications of creating a £30,000 pay gap. We're worried about the terms of the grade 18 compared to a head of service and the gap that will create between those officer roles. And we do believe that there is scope to restructure within the current pay banding. So this is the purpose for our report today. And point number 10 within our amendment, where it says here that agrees that any salary framework restructure relating to heads of service will be brought before committee to ensure elected member approval. And that's again to make sure that councillors are very much overseeing any structures in terms of pay grades. So that is the purpose for our amendment today. We fully support the hard work that officers are doing. We just feel that, given the current climate, we're fighting a pandemic, we're having to make frontline service cuts, that we don't feel that this is an appropriate time to be looking at this. So that is the reason for our amendment today. We fully agree with the restructure. However, we are concerned about the increase for heads of service. Thank you.
Nathan, as seconder, do you want to make any comment, please?
No, Convener, it's Councillor Burgess. I've been asked to second this motion, which I do now. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Des, you want to respond to the points highlighted by Megan, please?
Thank you, Convener. I would make the point, and it is detailed within the report, that in essence the salary change between HOS 4, which is what our heads of service are on just now, and HOS 2 is 7,500, not 30,000, 7,500. I think what Councillor Gallagher is referring to is the separation between what a head of service gets paid and what a senior NLC 17 or 18 gets paid. But those pay grades are national, so that's not an issue that resides within North Lancashire. That's a system of pay scales across Scotland as a whole, so we would just simply be in alignment with that. I would also make the point that in terms of taking the savings to delete the posts and redistributing the roles and responsibilities to a smaller group of people who are already paid less than their peers, clearly it may present certain challenges to the council at a future point. I would just leave it at that, Convener.
Fiona, do you want to, as head of the HR, make any contribution to the points that have been made, please?
Thank you, Leader. I would just pick up the points that Des has already made and reassure members that we've already done the additional benchmarking as far as the roles that sit underneath this. It's a completely different grading system, and that grading system was agreed with trade unions. They also are aware that there's a separate chief officer grading system, so I would fully support the points that Des has made. I would also make the further point that it's important that the grades we have at that second, not the chief officer, but the normal salary scales are also benchmarked, and they benchmark well. It's our heads of service in particular who do not benchmark with other local authorities. So on the basis of fair pay, that's why this proposal has been put forward, because it is only the heads of service that we have currently which are out of line with other local authorities, and that is due to historical decisions that were made when we took away the performance-related pay element. So just to reassure elected members that this has been fully researched and it benchmarks exactly as it should.
Megan, having heard Fiona and Des, you still want to go ahead with the amendment?
Yes, please, Convener.
Okay. Are there any other contributions? No one else in the chat bar? Then I would move the recommendations 1 to 9 on page 18 of the report.
Sorry, Convener, just to say that I think Councillor Johnson's trying to indicate to you, not in the appropriate way, but he is trying to indicate, as is Councillor Morgan.
Thank you very much for keeping me right, Jordan. Okay, Tom. Tom, you're on mute.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, I had typed my name in, but something's gone wrong there. We would reject the amendments. We also, when we were talking with Des at our group meeting, raised these concerns about the position of going up to HOS2 grades. But overall, there's a saving of 200,000. There's 2 senior posts deleted, and we see that as something for overall welcome. And we will be going along with the report as it actually is. The only other thing to be clarified on is that these officers are taking on extra duties in this matter. So presumably there's some slack, and they've now got something extra to do. That was another issue that came up on that particular point in the report. But overall, we accept the report.
I don't think you'll endear yourself to any officer by saying that there was slack there, but I find it ironic that you say that you're happy to take this saving of £200,000, but you weren't happy to take the previous saving of £547,000. I find that quite ironic. So can we move on then? Next name on the chat bar is Tommy Morgan. Tommy.
Thanks, Sam. It was just a comment. I was glad to hear the comments from members of the other groups saying that Des had given an equally positive presentation at their groups, whether they agreed with the content or not. And certainly that reflected what we got at the Labour group. And it was just something that I touched on when we were discussing it at the Labour group. And it's nothing to do against the recommendations, far from it. But the second last one there accords with the point I raised at the time, Des. And that is discussions that's going to go on during the year 2021-22 in relation to the IJB. Can I refer that specifically to what I think will be a temporary small reference for the future under adult health and social care? One thing that's become clear and was mentioned heavily last night when the vaccine was announced is that the biggest factor related to COVID, while gender's been mentioned, race has been mentioned, social class has been mentioned, the biggest factor is age. So I think it would be safe to say that that is going to be a burgeoning area that subsequent formal, informal, Scottish Government, UK Government reports are going to flag up. Is that going to be part of the ongoing discussions, Des, or is that too premature? Because I know Scottish Government are looking at a report to their credit as early as possible, and that might be April next year. But would this structure still stand in anticipation of what's going to come out of that and the inevitable extra duties? There'll be no slack in those areas in years to come with the problems that COVID has highlighted, specifically in relation to that age group.
Thanks, Tommy. Des, would you like to respond to the points, please?
Absolutely. So it's detailed within 2.26 and 2.21. And what we're talking about there is the fact that we absolutely understand that COVID has massively changed the landscape in terms of adult social care, adult health and wellbeing. And indeed, whilst the priority during 21-22 rightly will be on the vaccination, prioritised by age, which is Councillor Morgan's touching upon that, but there's also going to be significant change that lies ahead for care services. The National Care Review has already been announced by the Scottish Government, and it will be a fast-moving review. It will look to learn early lessons already picked up on during the current COVID emergency and apply them to Scotland early in the next financial year. It also links to why, in terms of the implementation of the proposals within this paper, they will be implemented at the end of 21-22. That is to allow us to capture those lessons, Councillor Morgan, those outcomes from that National Care Review. We expect to have that compiled and consolidated by around about September of the coming calendar year. And we'll be then bringing a report back to committee about what that means for our health and social care partnership and any changes or alterations contained within, which would then be implemented along the same timeline as indeed the changes within this report. So what you get is parity of treatment for all officers, regardless of whether they're employed by the council, co-funded by NHS or employed by the council but rest within the Health and Social Care Partnership, I think that's only fair and appropriate that all officers be treated the same.
Thanks very much, Des. Can we make progress? Can we just clarify? I've moved the recommendations on page 18. Is there a seconder for the recommendations?
Second the recommendations, Leader.
Do you want to say anything, Paul?
I think everything's been covered, thank you.
Okay, and we have an amendment moved by Councillor Gallagher and seconded by Councillor Burgess. Andrew, can we go to the vote, please?
Before we do, Councillor Goldie's indicating in the chat bar he wants to speak, Convener.
There's always somebody comes in at the tail end. Will it? Tail end, right? On you go.
Thanks, Convener. It's just to say that looking at the IGB and the contributions of what we're going to have to do with COVID, the vaccination will be welcomed. It may not be a panacea, and we may have to look at the whole thing again in the near future because we've got conditions such as long COVID and other associated conditions. And as Councillor Morgan pointed out, we do have an elderly demographic within the population. That was all, just a comment, Chair.
Thanks very much. An insight from your professional background, Billy. Appreciate it. Okay, Andrew, this time can we go to the vote, please?
Yes, Convener. So we have an amendment from Councillor Gallagher and a motion moved by yourself. I'll just ask members in the normal way. Councillor Barclay.
Motion.
Councillor Burgess.
Amendment.
Councillor Burrows.
Motion.
Councillor Damasio.
Motion.
Councillor Duffy.
Motion.
Councillor Fannin. Councillor Fannin. Amendment, thank you. Councillor Gallagher.
Amendment.
Councillor Goldie.
Motion.
Councillor Graham.
Motion.
Councillor Hume.
Motion.
Councillor Larson.
Motion.
Councillor Tom Johnson.
Motion.
Councillor Kelly.
Motion.
Councillor Lennon.
Motion.
Councillor Linden.
Motion.
Councillor Logue.
Motion.
Councillor McGowan.
Motion.
Councillor McNally.
Motion.
Councillor McPake.
Motion.
Councillor Morgan.
Motion.
Councillor Rorty.
Motion.
Councillor Alan Valentine. Councillor Valentine. See you on the call. Councillor Wilson.
Can I unmute?
Hi, Councillor Wilson.
Amendment.
Amendment, thank you. And Councillor Valentine, I heard you speaking there.
You're on silent, Alan.
No.
Still on silent. Perhaps the sooner you get electronic voting, the better. Yeah.
Convener, the amendment has received 4 votes, the motion 18 with no abstentions, so the motion is carried.
Thank you very much. Okay, we now move on to item 5 on the agenda. It's developing the capacity of communities, sustainable options, community asset transfer on pages 35 to 56. I'd ask Lisanne Murrich to talk to the report. Lisanne.
Thank you, Convener. Can I just check that everyone can hear me okay?
Perfect, Lisanne, carry on.
Thank you. Linked to the shared ambition for our communities articulated in the previous paper, this report explores the potential for community and voluntary sector groups through community asset transfer to develop and operate local services, not only to address local need and community ambition, but also in a practical way to support communities to realise their full potential to drive the changes required. Members will be familiar with the community asset transfer process, as it has been a subject of a number of reports to the Community Empowerment Committee and its predecessor, as the process itself was initially developed and subsequently reviewed and revised. The annual statutory reports are also considered at that committee. This report now looks at the community asset transfer process within the One Plan context, setting out the steps required to scale up accordingly. critically appraising the approach that would number of council assets as sustainable opportunities for local community and voluntary sector groups to operate services within our communities. Notwithstanding some of the challenges that the statutory community asset transfer process presents, there now requires to be a clearly resourced and timelined action plan established to focus this work to support our communities to explore and realise the benefits that the Council's asset management processes will offer. Sections 2.2 to 2.4 of the report set out the Council's CAP process in line with the Community Empowerment Scotland Act guidance. Section 2.5 looks at the future resource implications and requirements to progress a significant number of CAT requests, together with meeting the challenges around developing the capacity of community-based organisations to be in a position to successfully and sustainably fulfil requirements to take on and operate an asset. In line with relevant One Plan programme of work delivery plans, as set out in the executive summary, it is recommended that an appropriately resourced project plan is prepared for future consideration. Thank you, Convener. Happy to take any questions.
Sorry, my apologies. First question from Jim Hume.
Thanks, Chair. On page 41 and 2.5.1.4, it says, one of the bullet points, there'll be a dedicated surveyor recruited for this. I would like a very brief explanation as to why that post was felt necessary, based on the fact that it was an assumption, and I consider it a very big assumption that there will be a significant number of CAT requests. If there aren't, we're paying a surveyor a significant salary for not doing a lot, as far as I can see. Brief explanation of the logic for that, please.
Lisanne, are you in a position to respond to the question? Lisanne?
Thank you. Through you, Convener. I suppose I would want to reassure Councillor Hume that that was one of the areas that we would explore when we're preparing the full action plan to be presented going forward. It's just an area of pressure at present in terms of progressing the community asset transfers that we have at present. But we would bring back a full report which would outline the requirement or not for that particular post.
Jim, do you need a supplementary at this stage, or you wait a further report?
Very happy with the response, Jim.
Okay, thank you. The next question comes from Jordan. Jordan, please.
Thanks very much, Convener. I hope you can hear me okay. I think I've got some tech difficulties as well. However, Lisanne, one of the key things in terms of community asset transfer is that it's underpinned by, as you know, world-leading legislation on community empowerment. And a kind of key to that is the fact that local people right across Scotland, and in particular North Lanarkshire, are able to set their own priorities and decide for themselves what they consider to be community assets. On that basis then, and whilst members right across the board would be keen that the plans for community asset transfer are in line with the Council's corporate ambition, the One Plan, etc., how do you square that with the fact that the legislation is quite clear that it should deliver on local people's priorities, not just simply the Council's priorities, and ensure that the underpinning principle is that local people's views, priorities and ambitions are what is prioritised through this exercise, rather than simply preferring those that meet the Council's corporate ambition? I think that's a key principle. Thanks, Convener.
Lisanne, you want to respond to the question, please?
Thank you, Convener. I don't disagree with the member's comments. He's absolutely correct that the legislation supports communities to identify an asset or indeed a service that they would wish to, I suppose, make a bid for. So although this report is linked primarily to the ambitions articulated in the plan for North Lanarkshire, a plan that is the Community Planning Partnerships plan, I would also point out that it does not cut across the legislation and the guidance associated with community asset transfer. We would welcome communities' aspirations that lay beyond the plan for North Lanarkshire.
Georgie, you reassured? Okay, thank you. The next question comes from Councillor Barclay. Claire, please.
Thanks, Leader. Asked and answered, so I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question from Tom Johnson. Tom, please.
Thanks, Convener. I wanted the clarification on a couple of things. When you wrote this report, obviously the background to it was the Scottish Government Communities legislation. You've got all these criteria in this report, and I'm wondering whether there's similar reports with similar principles and clauses among the other 32 authorities, or is this purely a North Lanarkshire report, or is there sort of similar common work going on throughout the other 31 authorities? That's my first point.
Lisanne, have you any understanding what's happening in other authorities?
Other authorities will be taking a similar approach in terms of implementing the statutory guidance around the Community Empowerment Scotland Act.
Right, so this leads me on to my second point, that in North Lanarkshire we are putting this great emphasis on communities, and so of course does the Scottish Government. But I just want clarification on whether the emphasis on communities coming from the Council and possibly backed up by members of the local communities does not preclude minority groups or societies from wanting to take over particular properties, that they can't get pressurised, or I don't suppose the word bullied would come in, but there's no way in which they simply get pressurised out. I mean, I notice there are appeal clauses that can go to the Scottish Government, but are we quite happy that minority pursuits and groups that might want to take over a building will still have a relative freedom to do so, maybe in the face of what the Council wants and perhaps what the actual group on the regularly meeting community wants?
I think that's encapsulated in the report, Tom. There's very clear criteria which has got to be met, and they're highlighted in the report, and that comes from Scottish Government guidance. Lisanne, you want to comment?
Only just to provide a bit of further reassurance around a piece of fairly extensive, in fact, extensive research that will be carried out with the BAME community, which we will look at that very specific issue around community asset transfer policy to ensure that inadvertently we are not excluding groups, that we are in fact supporting groups to take forward their ambitions in terms of community asset transfer.
Hopefully that gives you reassurance, Tom. Okay.
It wasn't particularly that kind of grouping that I meant. I just meant maybe any minority hobby pursuit or anything that wanted to take over a building. Right, thanks.
Okay, Tom, thanks for that. Next question from Alan Graham, please.
Thank you, Jim. Excellent report, Lisanne. A quick question. What happens if the community over an asset and they can no longer sustain it? Who takes responsibility for that asset?
Lisanne?
Many of the community asset transfers that we deal with are long-term leases, so it would revert to the council in that case. There are a few that it is a whole-scale transfer out of the council's ownership. But if it was out of the council's ownership, it would be dealt with by the group. It would be out with the council's control at that point in time. But the majority tend to be longer term leases.
Thank you.
Okay. Next question from Bob Burrows, please.
Sorry, Leader, you caught me a wee bit there. We're unsure at this stage, Leader, about the number of cats that come in, and hopefully, I need to say this genuinely, I hope there's a lot that does come in, because I believe as well it's right and it should happen. But following on in section 2512 about resource considerations, Lisanne, can you tell the committee today that in actual fact you have sufficient resources staff on the ground because it is, as you say, in 2512, it's very intensive, especially at the very beginning of it. Do you have sufficient staff resources in place to meet all the potential demands that will come in? Thanks, Chair.
Lisanne, can you give Councillor Burrows that reassurance and other elected members?
At present, we are able to resource the community capacity building of requests and inquiries that we've got at present. There are around about 42 live inquiries that the team are dealing with. But to scale up beyond that to a more significant intensive period of community asset transfer would require more capacity building resource, and that's what a future report would highlight going forward.
I don't see any other member on the chat bar. Can I direct you then to the recommendations contained on page 36? There are 2 recommendations there. Is there unanimous agreement to endorse the 2 recommendations? Agreed. If so, thank you very much. It now takes us on, we've already done item 6, it takes us on to item 7, which is the Community Investment Fund, updated scenario planning. And Elaine, would you like to speak to the report, please? Elaine.
Thank you, Convener. In March, I brought a report to this committee updating the indicative value of the SIF at that time to 694 million. And I committed then also to an annual update, but I think it's essential that a further report is brought forward out with the annual update cycle to advise elected members on the impact of COVID on the projections for SIF. So the first part of the report gives some background to the economic situation, and it reflects on the fact that the economy initially shrank by 22%, and that growth and recovery back from that's been a bit slower than some economists expected. Now that we're in the midst of further COVID restrictions, it can be expected to slow further. The report also highlights that there are some concerns around the demand for new houses. While it was positive in the early stages, there was an initial bounce back. We're now seeing that slowing down. However, on the positive side, the council has seen planning applications holding up, and that's been reflected in the report. The planning and regeneration team is working on a developments tracker, and over time that will be a really important piece of work for us in informing the future SIF projections. On the house builder side, there is some doubt about longer term prospects. So the key message from the report in this section is that there is still significant uncertainty around the market, which we will need to be closely monitored. In relation to council tax, the report highlights that we're continuing to assume that the established principles whereby 1% of annual council tax increases will be set aside for future budgets for SIF investment, that will carry on. The report sets out 2 scenarios, and we've presented an optimistic scenario which looks at limited growth over the next couple of years, but then reverts back to original projections over the longer term. The pessimistic scenario assumes no growth over the next couple of years and then a steadier rise again with a recovery in the longer term. And the impact on the targeted value of the fund of these 2 scenarios is shown in the table in paragraph 2.8. The optimistic scenario shows a reduction of 60 million in the availability of resources, and the pessimistic scenario shows a reduction of 154 million based on the previous assessment. So in light of the uncertainty that is being faced, the Strategic Capital Delivery Group agreed that we would plan for the next year's 5-year capital programme with SIF resources assumed to be in line with the pessimistic scenario. And basing plans on the pessimistic scenario reduces the financial risk of committing funding for investment through SIF, but it does strike a balance, the right balance that allows us to continue with the much needed investment plans. But it's important to highlight that if the growth assumptions in the pessimistic scenario don't materialise over the next 5 years, at worst there will be a 200,000 revenue impact per year, and that's manageable in relation to our overall financial plans. So in summary, I believe this is a very positive report. It shows that because of the way the SIF has been designed, future projections will hold up to a large extent, and that's, to me, a very positive position to be in compared to what we may have projected based on the economic impact of COVID. So happy to take questions on that.
I don't see any members on the chat bar. Can I direct members to paragraph 213? You can see from that in March there'll be a report tabled asking the members to approve the programme based on the pessimistic assumption that Elaine has highlighted. So there'll be a further report coming back in March of next year. I don't see any on the chat bar. You agree to the recommendations contained on page 85, recommendations 1 to 3. Seems to be unanimous agreement. Thank you very much. Before moving on to agenda item 8, can I say that Archie Aitken will be leaving the meeting, and also Stephen Penn will leave the meeting. Archie in his capacity as Company Secretary of CLNL, and Stephen in his capacity as Chair of CLNL. I've asked Archie to make himself accessible in the event that there are any questions from the monitoring officer. So Andrew will contact Archie if there are any monitoring officer questions. Right. On the basis of that, can I direct
Jim, with your permission, I'll leave now. Having declared an
Sorry, I
interest.
forgot about your position.
Right.
So
Okay.
Councillor Morgan also leaves. No one else.
Thank you. Cheers.
No one else. Right. Thank you very much. Can I direct you then to page 93? There are 2 recommendations there. I'd ask Helen Little to got the wrong name here.
No.
Sorry. Heather. It's Heather Little.
Yeah, it is.
What made me think of Helen Little? I better not. Right.
Oh,
Okay.
That happens all the time.
Heather, sorry about that. Apologies.
That's okay, convener. Thank you very much. So this report provides an update on the ongoing programme to manage the insourcing of culture and leisure to North Lanarkshire Council for the 1st of April 2021. Lots of details. I'll just stick to the key points. So if I can first of all direct you to paragraph 2.1. The programme has been built around 5 key workstream areas, and you note the key areas of activity for each in this paragraph. All are working towards agreed milestones, all of which remain on track with appropriate management of identified risk. Moving on to 2.2 gives further details of the workforce transfer strategy, and in particular progress that has been made on the 2-pay exercise. 2-pay places a number of obligations on both CLNL and North Lanarkshire Council, and it's really important that these are fulfilled. We have now an established forum for NLC and CLNL to meet regularly with trade union colleagues, and this approach is working well. The last meeting was actually just 2 days ago. Again, in line with our responsibilities under 2-pay, the Council has formally advised of the measures it intends to take at the point of transfer, and I would direct you to the bullet points under section 2.23 for more details of these. The trade unions did seek further information when they were presented with these measures, and that has now been provided to them. Moving on to 2.25, in relation to the transfer of employees, you will see in this paragraph, we have initially identified an FTE of 63.06 that will move to centralised or specialised support services. A further 150.68 will go to asset and procurement. I would say to you, though, that these numbers are subject to change, not least by the impact of CLNL's current voluntary redundancy exercise. Moving on to 2.3, which touches on recovery and ongoing financial challenges. Clearly, insourcing has to continue regardless of ongoing operational challenges, but it's important that we continue to consider the impact of employees of CLNL and its model of service delivery as we think about future design of services. Culture and leisure continue to recover in line with Scottish Government guidance. You will note in paragraphs 2.32 and 2.33 those facilities that had prior to the changes that have taken place in the last couple of weeks. It is well understood that there is significant public concern over the fact that some facilities are not yet open. However, reopening plans can only be actioned if it's viable to do so. Ultimately, this has been about reshaping a model for culture and leisure services which is both resilient and sustainable. Finally, taking you to 2.35, members will be aware of the financial challenges facing CLNL,
some of which certainly will be eased through the VRS exercise I mentioned earlier. CLNL have benefited from furlough, and with the decision to extend this until next March, they have been looking at other options of how to use this in the most appropriate way. The Council's financial projections anticipate that we will be required to offer supply relief until the end of the next financial year. In the meantime, CLNL continue to pursue opportunities for external funding, and you will see details of that in 2.37, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Heather. The sole name on the chat bar at this stage. Sorry, can somebody mute? Right. Jordan, you want to make a comment or question?
Many thanks, convener. Comments and questions, but I'll be as brief as I can. Heather, in terms of section 2.2.4 of the report, you very helpfully outlined some of the narrative in relation to the engagement ongoing with trade unions, and I just wondered how frequently that engagement was taking place, and the general response of trade unions in terms of whether that is a positive and ongoing engagement or not. And then, as you would expect, given that I've raised recovery on a number of occasions where possible for culture and leisure, notwithstanding the fact that culture and leisure is obviously an alio, in terms of section 2.3 of the report, therefore, two key questions come to mind. One, in terms of 2.3.5 and the recognition, also at 2.3.6, of the challenging financial position the alios are in, particularly with the loss of revenue, etc. I wondered what work had been undertaken to ensure that the alios were maximising the potential use of Scottish Government grant funding in terms of COVID-19, MGS Fund, Leisure Recovery Fund, etc., to ensure that they were accessing all that they can to help close that revenue gap. And then secondly, the second element of that particular question is that you rightly recognise that section 2.3.4 of the report, the significant public concern about the fact that some of their facilities will never reopen again. And that is a very real and tangible concern for many, and it's not a partisan point, it's a point that all politicians are hearing right across the board. And we know the financial challenges. I guess the question comes from that then, is when can we start to talk openly and publicly with all of the community about the realistic future for facilities across North Lanarkshire in that context? Thanks, Heather. Some easy questions.
I don't think your last question should be directed to Heather. The previous ones are appropriate for Heather. I will bring in Lisanne or Robert Steenson to answer your last question.
Thanks,
Heather,
that's your prerogative.
Right, Heather, can you respond to the two questions before that one, please?
I can, yeah, and hopefully I've managed to note them down, but just let me know if I don't answer them. In terms of frequency, so at the moment we've had 4 meetings with the trade unions since August, which was round about the time when we were able to start speaking to them in any great detail. We met with them on Tuesday of this week and are actually due to have a follow-up meeting in Tuesday coming. I would say that on the whole it is going well. I think there have been some frustrations from the trade unions at times when they have asked for information that we haven't been able to provide. The only reason at that point in time was because it wasn't available. They now have everything that they're looking for. I think that process is working reasonably well. I think relationships are fairly good, and that's probably all I could really say on that particular point. Did that cover your point, Councillor Linden, and the unions?
Thumbs up. Yes. Okay, Heather. Any further comment required? I mean, you're aware, Jordan, that the trade unions represent employees of CLNL and they're not NLC employees. You're aware of that? Okay.
Yes, convener. As a former board member, I'm acutely aware.
Paul Kelly on the chat bar. Paul.
Thanks, Leader. It's just to get some clarity. I mean, what our ALIO and our culture and leisure staff have done has been fantastic in terms of support for the pandemic, and they've supported the flu vaccination in terms of the facilities being used. And I suppose the question goes to say either to Des or to Robert is around, obviously we're, as a council, we're standing shoulder to shoulder with the NHS and government, doing everything we can to support the good news this week about the vaccination programme. I'm assuming that will be maybe looking at using some of our cultural leisure facilities to support that effort, and it's just to get a bit of clarity around that.
Rob? Thanks, Paul. Robert, you want to take that question up, and you also to respond to the third question that Jordan asked. So 2 points.
Yes, I will. Yes, I will, Leader. I'll respond to that question first of all. To Councillor Kelly, yes, absolutely. In terms of both mass testing and the vaccination programme, we're working closely with our colleagues in NHS Lanarkshire and also beyond, and also with South Lanarkshire Council to make sure that we have those facilities in appropriate locations. And a lot of those locations will be our sport and culture and our community facilities, which are currently operated by CLNL. So yes. And when they are utilised for that purpose, it will be for in all likelihood a significant period of time. So we're working on that, and I think we have to recognise that the council, with the health board and with our other public sector partners, we're going to have to prioritise in working our way out of this pandemic. And mass testing and the vaccination programme is obviously the key national measure that we're going to take forward to do that. So we'll support that 100%. In terms of the recovery process, I think we have to be realistic at this particular moment in time. We're in level 4 just now. The premises can't operate. There's going to be a relaxation over the festive period. All indications are that there will be further restrictions throughout January and into February in order to deal with any slippage in figures and slippage in terms of case numbers over the festive period. And we will then be moving into probably late February, March, and into the spring next year before we're in a position to consider reopening most of these facilities. At that point, CLNL will be transferring into the council, and we will have a decision to make because, as has been outlined in section 2.3, savings decisions have been made by the council over previous years, and a model has been developed. When we move forward, the affordability for these premises is that the organisation will have a budget within the council of just over £13 million. And what we have to do is make decisions on what premises and what facilities we can afford to open for that £13 million. And that process will be taken forward through the budget setting process of the council so that everyone's got an opportunity to feed in, understand the issues which will have to be considered when we are looking at reopening them, and make that decision based on the financial envelope which will be available to the council at that point to operate those services, and that will be taken in the context of the budget setting process for the whole council, because it will then be council services come April next year, and it will be dealt with in the same consideration that will be given to all other savings options.
Thanks very much, Robert. Next question from Bob Burrows. Bob.
Aye, Chair, it's a question about finance. It's clear that there's been a massive income loss to the organisation, and the UK, they actually put in the furlough that they were able to get access to. Can somebody, maybe it's Elaine or others, give us some indication of the help that the Scottish Government has put in to directly support the loss that for this organisation and others throughout the 32 councils? But the question's about North Lanarkshire. Thanks, Elaine.
Elaine, would you like to respond to that question, please?
Yeah, I can. So we projected significant loss of income, as you quite rightly said, but we offset furlough funding from that. So there was a fairly significant amount of furlough funding, which CLNL was able to claim and mitigate against some of the income that was lost. However, Scottish Government are in the process of working through a loss of income compensation scheme, which we believe will be available, and it will come to the council, given that the council have agreed to underwrite the loss of income at this stage for CLNL. But we're still awaiting details from Scottish Government around exactly how that income compensation scheme will be distributed and what we are likely to see as a result.
Thanks very much, Lynn. Does that answer your question, Bob?
Well, it answers the question, Chair, but just a comment from me. It'll be another one on the list, I suspect, about the time it takes. And I accept that there are issues going on, but the time it takes to get the material filtering through into the coal face where it's needing to go. But we'll wait and we'll see what happens. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much for your optimism. Next member on the chat bar, Willie Goldie, please.
Thanks, Convener. It's just a question. Like, we've extended furlough to March next year. If there are the changes and the organisations are brought back into the council, if furlough was extended, would we no longer be able to claim that?
So, thanks, Willie. Elaine, you want to respond to that, please?
We should still be able to claim that, Councillor Goldie, because furlough is available where we can evidence that employees aren't paid through Scottish Government funding. So for CLNL, it's largely relying on the income they bring in, and coming into the council won't change that.
I don't see any other names on the chat bar. Can I direct you to the two recommendations on page 93? You agree to the recommendations? If so, thank you very much for your cooperation. That concludes the meeting. Thank you for calling in. Thank you.